I'll announce this outright. We may have reached the darkest period of Roman history. The depression the Romans felt and the humiliations the empire suffered in the late 14th century may be unparalleled in its 2 millennia-long existence. Roman dignity was at stake like never before, like its survival, and there is even a lack of Roman historians for those embarrassing days. The Palaiologan Renaissance was attaining its zenith. The polity of the Romans saw no lack of bright intellectuals urgently trying to fan up their national pride, but they were kinda unwilling to record their present affairs for us, preferring instead to dwell on ancient glories and spread their classical learning to the Italians. How did we get to this stage? Eastern Rome Summarized is here to narrate to you the events which reduced the Roman Empire to beggary. Ioannes V Palaiologos was shortly Basileus by 1355, but his future fate of being the most pathetic Roman emperor ever is foreshadowed by the fact that he was broke and in debt to Venice from his civil war. He wasn't optimistic about his future either. The Turks were already entrenched in Europe, and he felt help could only come from the Latins. Perhaps himself being half Italian let him trust Italian powers more. He handed 2 valuable Roman islands, Chios and Lesbos, to the Genoese, as he felt he could no longer defend them from Turks. He also wrote to the Pope a desperate sellout letter with the aid of the Latin bishop of Smyrna, Paul. He was willing to abandon his Orthodox faith, instruct his eldest son, Andronicus IV, in Latin fashion, and give his younger son, Manuel II, to the papacy as a hostage. Ioannes was practically signaling to the world that in return for a meager aid, the Basileus could lower himself tremendously, and his later humiliations from his powerful neighbors resulted primarily from his own willingness to be submissive. One neighbor wouldn't trouble him anymore, luckily. Emperor Dusan of Serbia, who died at the apex of his career. He was about to take Constantinople too, and his death ended the Serbian imperialist threat. Later, Serbs made for better potential allies than enemies, as they too, like the Romans, became a Balkan Orthodox people preyed on by the Turks, but for now, they were still happy to serve with Turks together in Roman civil conflicts. Kanakousinos may have retired without a fuss, but his son Matthäus didn't. He extended the civil war and marched on the capital in 1356, only for his Serbs to betray him to Ioannes. The next year, Matthäus was sent to Lesbos, and he had to swear fealty to Ioannes, ending the Palaiologis clash with the Kantakouzini. Meanwhile, the Pope read Ioannes' letter and didn't think much of it. He sent papal envoys to Constantinople for propaganda, who allegedly converted Ioannes to Catholicism, but not a lot of people believed that. Yet with or without Ioannes' applications, an anti-Turkish Christian League was being constituted anyway, as growing Turkish power seriously impeded Latin activities in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the Ottomans weren't invincible yet. Orhan's eldest son, the Gazi Suleiman, who was spearheading the Turkish conquest of Europe, died suddenly, while his youngest son, Khalil, also a grandson of Kanakousinos, was taken by Phocaean pirates. The Ottomans were still at the mercy of the Christians at sea, and Orhan needed Ioannes to get the unhappy governor of Phocaea to release the prince in 1358. He paid Ioannes handsomely and agreed to engage Khalil to the daughter of the Basileus, who may have planned to ensure his nephew-in-law's succession to the Ottoman throne. It'd be ideal for the Romans to have one of their own ruling the Turks, who recently briefly took Didymoteichon in 1359. They were penetrating dangerously deep into Thrace, but the Pope's league raiding Turks at Lampsakos gave Ioannes some hope of solid Latin help, and he would be desperate enough to do anything to get it. Oh, do you hear that? That's the sound of the Turks permanently taking Didymoteichon in 1361, after a brief expulsion. Thus fell the capital of Kantakousinos, as did the fortune of his family, who used to be so prominent in the empire. Matthäus and his kin all had to move to the Morea, where his brother, Manuel Kantakousinos, the first despot of Morea, ruled the province solidly, but they would never play a huge role in imperial history again. So Ioannes was rid of his rival for good, but his administration in no way rivaled that of Manuel in the Morea. As a plague ravaged the city by 1362, Constantinople became more depressing by the day, and nobody wanted to stay there anymore, not even the emperor. And meanwhile, Sultan Orhan died. His son Murad I succeeded him. The funny thing about Ottomans was that their first four sultans possessed each the aggression and the might of their predecessor squared. As Orhan far surpassed Osman in his successes, so was Murad miles more bellicose and powerful than Orhan, and Murad's son, Bayezid, was a downright terror, but we will save him for later, as he could only be dealt with by Ioannes' son, Manuel II, the unfortunate prince of such enormous capabilities that he would have flourished in any other era. Ioannes could barely cope with even Murad. He instantly signed a treaty with the new sultan and hoped for the best. But what best was there to hope for from the eventual conqueror of most of the Balkans? In 1363, Philippopolis was conquered by Lala Shahin, who was then named Ottoman governor of Rumelia, the European Roman lands. Guess who's here to stay for good? Ioannes panicked. He ratified a treaty with Venice to patrol the straits, to no result. His patriarch Callistos was sent to get Serbian aid, with no result. Bulgaria felt indifferent, and Romans had to raid Black Sea ports to prevent their collaboration with Turks. Neighboring Christians simply felt this was not their problem, and they would soon realize their error. Now, the only hope for the Romans was news of a grand crusade led by Hungary and Cyprus. By 1364, the more Latinophile among the Romans, along with their emperor, were very supportive of any ideas of a crusade. Desperation could sway opinions like nothing else. This was fully endorsed by the most Latinophile of Latinophiles, the young scholar Demetrius Gidonis, who returned to public affairs in 1364 after some long time off to pursue his study of Latin philosophy. He was polemical, aggressive, and one might even call him a Latin sellout, but he was fascinating, and I wish I could talk more about him, but time constraints. You just need to know that he was first taken under the wing of Cantacuzenios, who saw his immense potential and encouraged him to learn Latin. He spearheaded the Greco-Latin cultural exchange, and being fluent in the tongue of the ancient Romans, he translated and studied many Latin works. 3 emperors adored and employed him. He was more responsible for the education of Manuel II than the boy's petty excuse of a father, Ioannes. So I guess we have him to thank for instructing the best of the Palaiologan emperors. But by 1365, he also converted to Catholicism, so yeah, he was a controversial guy. Not the most popular man at parties with all his Latin praising, anti-Palamism, and endless attempts to preach for church union and for the Romans to embrace their Western brothers in Christ. In following years, more Roman intellectuals would follow his lead, convert to the Latin faith, and immigrate to Italy to read books in peace and teach ancient Greek wisdom to the Latins. For the brightest among the Romans, this future, away from their homes, was the brightest they could hope for. And whenever this happens, you can be sure that a state is decaying. Sorry for the long rant. Yes, about the crusade. It launched for Egypt instead of at the Turks, and the King of Hungary, Louis, didn't even join as he was busy being a good papist boy and bashing the Orthodox by taking Bulgaria within. Why in the world Ioannes thought it would be a good idea to ask for help from this guy, in person, is beyond me. I'm simply too dumb to understand his political wisdom. The first time a Roman emperor visited a foreign land begged for aid. Ioannes met Louis in Buda, and after months of empty talk, he was only allowed to leave by leaving his son Manuel II as a hostage in Hungary. Even then, Ioannes couldn't go home, as the Bulgarian Tsar trapped him in Vidin due to beef with both Hungary and Rome. His son in Constantinople, Andronicus IV, offered no help at all. Just when the Roman Empire hit peak embarrassment, surprise salvation came from the Latins in 1366. Ioannes' cousin, Count Amadeo of Savoy, funded a personal expedition against the Turks and to save his helpless kinsmen. He joined forces with some men from the Roman army in Lesbos and retook Gallipoli for the empire with no fuss. A Latin offering solid help without a billion conditions did warm the Romans' hearts, but Guidoni still needed to give a whole speech about how the Latins were Western Romans, to convince them to let Amadeo's army into the city. Understandable, the trauma from 1204 didn't fade easily. Ioannes soon heard about his cousin's arrival and wrote to him. Amadeo immediately set out to terrorize Bulgaria to save him. The Savoyard fleet took most of their Black Sea coastal cities, and the Tsar had to let Ioannes go. The next year, the cousins met. Ioannes had to pay for Amadeo's Bulgarian expedition, and he got those Black Sea cities. But now this seems almost too good to be true. Why were the Latins being this fair? Then Amadeo cut to the point. Union. The Pope wanted the submission of the Romans, and while submissive Ioannis was eager to convert, the rest of the Romans weren't. The monk Cantacuzenius ardently opposed papal supremacy, and voiced the opinion of his people. Union must only be discussed in an ecumenical council, with all of the pentarchy attending. This seemed like a nice idea, and after Amadeo cleared out Turks in the vicinity of Constantinople, he left, reminding Ioannis to come to Italy soon for the sake of union. The Roman clergy excitedly awaited the ecumenical council. In vain. The Pope had no interest in open discussion and expected only the unconditional recognition of his authority. Soon the Romans realized that they were played false, and Latinophobia rose again. In 1368, the Palamites bullied Prochoros Kydonis, the brother of that hyper-Latinophile Kydonis, who was then preparing for the emperor's coming journey to Old Rome. Ioannis too was being bullied by Venetians. The crown jewels that he pawned were still in Venice, and they wanted a lot, or they'd sell the jewels. So Ioannis haggled until he arrived in Italy in 1369. His trip was not the most joyous of affairs, but finally in October, the Roman emperor arrived in Rome. The last time this happened was in Constans II's day, in 663. This time, however, the Roman emperor kissed the feet of the pontiff, and submitted fully to the Pope, in public. Now the Pope was satisfied, and saw Ioannis as a devout Catholic prince, worthy of calling a crusade for. He damn well needed a crusade, because back in the east, the Ottomans seized Adrianople, and Murad made it his new capital. The race was getting more Turkish by the day, while Ioannis was stuck in Italy and forced by the papacy to declare his Catholicism. The next year, the Pope wrote to the Eastern Romans to follow the emperor, but nobody gave a damn, and the Pope was powerless to stir a crusade anyway, so again neither side fulfilled their promise. Ioannis then became the first Roman emperor to visit Venice, to barter over his imperial dignity. He proposed to sell Tenedos to pay his debts and get the jewels back. But back in Constantinople, Andronicus IV was urged by his Genoese friends to refuse this offer, and the Venetians detained the ever more broke Ioannis in Venice. Only when Manuel II personally rescued him with bail money could the Basileus go home in 1371, with no Western aid and even poorer. This decade was truly a momentous one for the Ottomans. They started with a bang. Some Serbian nobles united and assembled a large army to crush the Turks, but Lala Shahin and another Ottoman veteran, Evrenos Bey, slaughtered the Serbs at Maritsa River in a night raid. Christian resistance crumbled in the Balkans. In the following years, the Ottomans vassalized most of these rulers. The Serbs took a hard hit, but they were still the only lot who actively did something against the Turks, and even Kydonis was thinking of allying with them when he realized that Andronicus IV had been willing to negotiate the surrender of Gallipoli to Murad in his father's absence. Kydonis' pupil Manuel II couldn't sell his empire's honor like his father and brother, and he was the only Roman doing something in all this chaos. Ruling from Thessaloniki, he began to reconquer the Macedonian lands lost to the Serbs, starting from Serres. The next year, the Turks besieged Serres, but Manuel drove them off. In contrast, Ioannis chickened out before them. Historians speculate that right then, Ioannis submitted as a vassal to Murad. The chronology is very confusing, but I assure you that the Romans were Ottoman slaves by the end of the 1370s, no matter who bowed down, Ioannis or Andronikos, as Caudelis claims. For the first time, the Roman Empire was subordinate, obliged to pay tribute and fight by the Sultan's side, right after kissing the Pope's feet. I'd laugh it wasn't so sad. Get ready for more pointless self-harm. It's 4th Palaiologan Civil War time. In 1373, Andronicus IV had enough of his father and revolted, but not alone. He did so with his fellow youthful rebel, Savci Bey, son of Murad, and the Ottomans found themselves working with their Roman vassals to quell the rebellion of their princes. Having seen Murad's might, surely you won't doubt that the young men were put down. Showing his paternal affection, Murad blinded Savci and later executed him. He forced his vassal Ioannis to do the same, but the Palaiologi took care to be more humane since Michael VIII blinded his Lascarid predecessor, and Ioannis only half-blinded his son and his grandson, the future Ioannis VII, who were imprisoned and disinherited. This made Manuel II officially the co-emperor and heir, which, if Andronikos didn't escape later, would have been great for the empire, as Manuel was competent, and this shows in how he re-established Roman authority in Macedonia, though he confiscated monastic lands for military use, so he wasn't insanely popular with those who refused to see the bigger picture, but still he was a better choice for the emperor than his brother. Andronikos languished in jail for 3 years, until Ioannes sold Tenedos to Venice, and the jealous Genoese bailed him out of prison to protect their commercial interests. First thing Andronikos did? Promised Tenedos to the Genoese and Gallipoli to Murad. With his foreign armies, Emperor Andronikos IV took Constantinople, then imprisoned Ioannes V and his brothers, Manuel and Theodoros, who too suffered in prison for 3 years. But Manuel developed an insane fraternal bond with Theodoros, his only competent brother. This would help the empire in the future. The Genoese went for Tenedos, but the Romans there were loyal to their vassalage Ioannes, and they resisted with the Venetians, who assaulted the Genoese and Andronikos IV in Constantinople the next year. This spiraled into the War of Chioggia between Genoa and Venice, another squabble for Eastern Mediterranean trade colonization. Andronikos IV and his son Ioannes VII recovered some sight, and they were crowned. Then he ceded Gallipoli to Murad after a decade of Christian reoccupation. He campaigned as Murad's vassal, doing exactly what he despised his father for, and the empire was now more embroiled in Turkish and Italian affairs. Venice and Genoa finally took their fighting out of the empire after Venice failed to take Phocaea in 1378, and in 1379, Ioannes V escaped with his family to the court of Murad, who stopped supporting Andronikos IV because Ioannes sold out even more Roman dignity. A Turkish army and Venetian navy put Ioannes and Manuel back on the throne, but Andronikos escaped to Galata with Kanakouzenos and his daughters as hostage. So now we have a civil war right in Constantinople between Galata and the rest of the city, or rather, a war between the Genoese and the Venetians and Turks. In Greece, meanwhile, the Latin Navarrese Company conquered Thebes from the Catalan Company for their employer, Nerio Acciaioli, who would soon be the new Duke of Athens. Down south, Despot Manuel Kanakouzenos of Morea died after a successful reign in 1380, and Mattheus succeeded him, but clearly Mistra needed a more capable ruler, who came after the civil war ended in 1381, when the Palaiologi reached an accord. Andronikos IV and Ioannes VII were Ioannes V's heirs again, at Manuel's expense, and they stopped fighting. Kanakouzenos was freed, and he joined his family in the Morea, while Theodoros was appointed its new despot, though he had to fight a son of Mattheus for it. Later, the War of Chioggia ended too. Amadeo of Savoy mediated peace between Venice and Genoa. He took Tenedos and depopulated its Romans so they couldn't fight for it again. So all was happy, except, well, Manuel. He had been loyal to his idiot father forever, and now he was left out because Murad wanted it? Hell no. As soon as he finished his duties for Murad, he sailed for Thessaloniki and set himself up in 1382 as the Emperor of Thessaly in Macedonia, which he tried to retake for Rome. There, he also defied his father and warred against the Turks, relieving Serbs, which he freed before, from an Ottoman siege. Oh my, a Roman military victory against the Turks. When did that last happen? Manuel proved his worth, and this prestige boosted from Constantinople to Epirus. His teacher Kidonis, still in the city, told him how happy the people were. Thessaly, which the last Serb ruler, John Uroš, left to the Roman noble, Alexios Angelos Philanthropinos, recognized Manuel's suzerainty, and Angelos was made a Caesar. Epirus, under the Serbian despot Thomas Prelibovic, the Albanian slayer, did the same. Basically, for the entirety of Manuel's 5-year rule in Thessaloniki, he held all of northern Greece, an insane feat for that day and age. Theodoros also firmly established himself as the despot of Morea in 1383, and the bros might have just ruled Greece happily ever after, but no. Murad was mad. He sent an army against Manuel, and Serbs fell immediately, being plundered thoroughly. The Turks then besieged Thessaloniki, letting its citizens choose between servitude and slaughter. Manuel was ready to fight to the end, but he knew the Thessalonikians would sell out their city to save their lives and property, so he gave an epic speech urging them to defend their freedom and heritage. His plea fell on deaf ears, as the socio-economic divide was simply too great in Thessaloniki for there to be a united resistance. That he even resisted for a few years was a miracle. His bishop abandoned Thessaloniki in 1384, and Manuel received almost no help. Despot Thomas of Epirus died. The Caesar of Thessaly probably sent him little aid too. He continued helping his brother Theodoros even in these times, although the despot of Morea was too caught up fighting Latins in the south with his new ally, Nerio Acciaioli, in 1385 to send help back. Manuel's appeal to the Venetians for help was rejected. In Constantinople, Andronikos almost started another civil war, but luckily he died. The Turks weren't idle while they laid siege to Thessaloniki. They conquered vast swaths of the Balkans. Sofia fell, then Nisus II in 1386. Even Mount Athos submitted to Ottoman authority. Bulgaria and Serbia were on the verge of being occupied, and the Serbian prince Lazar organized a Christian resistance while Murad had to return to Anatolia. The next year, Manuel became too discouraged by the Thessalonicans and fled the city before Thessaloniki surrendered. The second city of the empire fell to the Ottomans. He escaped, and ironically, Manuel only found refuge with Murad in Bursa before his father Ioannes had to take him back into the empire. Poor Manuel was confined on Lemnos while the Ottomans continued the subjugation of the Balkans, although Lazar's efforts bore some fruit and helped defeat the Turks invading Bosnia in 1388. This pretty much united all Balkan Christians willing to fight, and Lazar led them against Murad and his son Bayezid at the decisive Battle of Kosovo on June 15, 1389. I will digress before I make this episode about Serbian history, as the legendary showdown at Kosovo has so many details and myths, but the gist was that both armies were destroyed, both Lazar and Murad died, but Bayezid became Sultan and finished his father's conquest, vassalizing Serbia. As I have already alluded, this Sultan was insanely ambitious and unstable, warring in Europe and Anatolia. And what were the Romans doing at this time? Still busy with their own squabbles, as Ioannes VII rallied support in Genoa against his grandfather Ioannes V. Just why? Manuel was allowed to return to Constantinople by an ill Ioannes V in case Ioannes VII came back with Genoese support, which the young man did in 1390, and he allied with Bayezid II to take the city. Again, Manuel had to save his father. He snuck out of the capital and returned with Latin aid to oust Ioannes VII. This started Bayezid's lifelong rivalry with Manuel. He wanted to play kingmaker like Murad, but failed, so the Romans, Manuel especially, would suffer for it. He forced his vassals, both Manuel and Ioannes VII, to campaign for him against Philadelphia, the last free Roman city of Western Asia Minor. Roman emperors warring against Romans in the final island of Romanitas, amongst an almost completely Turkish Anatolia. I'm so done. Meanwhile, Bayezid forced Ioannes V to demolish some of Constantinople's fortifications, or he'd blind Manuel, and the already deeply humiliated old Basileus had to comply. While Philadelphia was the last Roman city in the west of Anatolia, I'd like to kindly remind you all of the Empire of Trebizond, whose story I did promise to save for another time, but I must inform you of these developments. Their emperor, Alexios III Megas Komnenos, who worked for as long as Ioannes V but vigorously defended his realm against invaders in contrast, died, but not before allying with the Turkish emir in Erzincan. This emir then allied with a new eastern power, whose name spread fear from China to Anatolia. But before his arrival, Bayezid continued degrading the Romans, and Philadelphia fell in 1391. Ioannes V died, finally ending his miserable reign. I'm sure he was as frustrated with himself as we are with him, for it was his actions which reduced the Roman Empire into a beggar in the west and a slave in the east. He most probably died from self-loathing, as he wasn't even that old yet. I'm sorry if I seem harsh with him, but I'm just so done, and please let me just get on with Manuel II's reign. The Vasilevs fled from Bayezid's camp before the Sultan could try his tricks and entered Constantinople as the Emperor of the Romans. Guidonis hailed his pupil as a philosopher king, but a small faction still supported Ioannes VII, so of course there was no Roman political unity even now. Bayezid flew into a flying rage, but was too tied up with his Anatolian Turkish enemies to murder Manuel, so he settled for extracting an inhumane amount of tribute from Constantinople and forcing Manuel to come back and campaign with him. The Vasilevs had to obey. He left his mother Eleni as a regent, then helped Bayezid subjugate his enemies on the Black Sea coast. My man was so depressed by seeing ruined ancient Greco-Roman cities and suffering Bayezid that his only consolation was by writing a theological dialogue. Luckily, the campaign was short, and Manuel went home in 1392, and he married, at last, to the Serbian lady Helena Draga, mother of the last Roman emperor. The end is nearing. Then, Manuel also crowned himself in splendid ceremony, reminding his populace a last time of Roman cultural supremacy, a belief that he always held even in the toughest of days, though it was no secret that his empire was feeble, and his patriarch Antonius had to refute Moscow's claim that the emperor was not to be respected as the head of the Orthodox world anymore in 1393. Ottoman military threat also increased, as after a Bulgarian revolt was suppressed and their Tsar executed, the Bulgarian state just came to an end. Rome's greatest Balkan nemesis was suddenly just another Ottoman province. R.I.P. Bulgaria, you gave us centuries of showdowns with the Romans. Bayezid also began invading Greece with Avranos Bey. Thessaly, so recently restored under the rule of a Roman Caesar, was conquered. Then in winter, Bayezid summoned all his Balkan Christian vassal rulers in Ceres, so not only Manuel had to meet his least favorite person in the world, but Despot Theodoros and Ioannes VII all came too, and for Manuel, it felt as if they were all roosters coming for a carnage. And after suffering much psychological torment, Manuel dashed back to Constantinople in 1394. Theodoros was ordered to remain with Bayezid, but he was struck as well and fled back to the Morea. The despot had done so well for himself. Working with his father-in-law Nerio, he had expanded his pasture to Argos and Nafplia, but now he had to cede this to the Venetians, because, unsurprisingly, the Palaiologis' escape provoked Bayezid, and the Ottomans began their final phase of the conquest of the Roman Empire. Nerio didn't bequeath Athens to Theodoros, but to Carlo Tocco of Cavalonia, who was afraid of the despot and called on the Turks against him. The full might of the Ottoman army under Avranos Bey fell upon Theodoros and the Latin-Greek princes, who, now having experienced the Turkish scimitar, finally stirred up some real sympathy in Western Europe. Avranos sacked Athens and terrorized the Morea, but despot Theodoros was able to hold him at bay, though not for long. Even more pressing was that, after Manuel refused to return to Bayezid again, the Sultan lashed out and blockaded Constantinople. Thus, the Queen of Cities was besieged once more. Hopelessness reigned more than ever in the capital, as Bayezid aimed to starve the Romans to submission. The Venetians took some pity and sent grain to the hungry people, and they even offered Manuel asylum in Venice, but the Vasilevs would not leave his capital yet. The following year, Constantinople moaned, while Theodoros endured Turkish onslaught in the Morea. He did, however, achieve some gains against Tocco and took Corinth, as the Turks had to face the threat of a crusade. The Latins were roused, and King Sigismund of Hungary led the crusade of Nicopolis with French allies. Bayezid briefly left the city to face 100,000 crusaders and massacre them, a disaster for Christians. Then Bayezid resumed his siege, and the Avranos returned to invading Greece. Manuel was devastated, and the Romans were growing restless, contemplating surrender or conversion to Islam. This must have given the Vasilevs PTSD of his days ruling Thessaloniki. Despair in the city was indescribable. Everyone was poor and suffering. Any respectable Roman with means would have already reached safer lands, like Manuel's friend, the scholar Manuel Chrysoloras, another pupil of Kydonis. Doesn't he sound familiar to Renaissance enthusiasts among you? Chrysoloras was invited to teach Greek in Florence, and he would serve as the Vasilevs' important diplomat in the West. In 1397, the siege slightly relaxed, and Manuel right away began sending deputies to Latin rulers, who also began collecting money for the Romans. In the Morea, the Venetians refused to help Theodoros, and there Argos was sacked to the ground as karma. Theodoros' army was beaten at Leontarium by the Turks. The whole Peloponnese was ravaged and looted afterwards. In 1399, Marshal Boucicaut, a French veteran from Nicopolis, led soldiers to help Constantinople. Manuel was heartened, and he raided the Turks with Boucicaut, but it was not enough to save the city. Boucicaut then persuaded the Vasilevs to finally leave his capital and ask for help in Western Europe personally. He even convinced Ioannes VII to make up with his rival uncle to rule Constantinople in his absence. Manuel departed on his grand tour of the West, a journey which would bring him to provinces lost to the Roman Empire almost 1,000 years ago. The Vasilevs left his wife and sons with Theodoros, whose situation was also desperate, and asked Manuel for permission to sell Mistral to the Knights Hospitallers for defense against the Turks, which was approved, though Theodoros would later regret the decision, as the Turkish threat soon faded. That new eastern power I mentioned earlier was the terrifying Timur the Lame, and when Bayezid demanded tribute from Erzincan, Timur's vassal, the lame conqueror took offense. Now the Ottomans were his problem too, and it would be he who would save Constantinople, not the West, despite Manuel's impressive tour. By the turn of the 15th century, he arrived in Italy and was warmly welcomed. Ioannes V was received on humiliating terms, and though Manuel had to pursue his policy, he was able to utilize his personal charm and his belief in the merits of his own Roman culture to melt the hearts of the Latins. He was a beggar too, essentially, yes, but he didn't act like one. He traveled to Milan, where he met Chrysoloras and many Italians eager to accept Greek culture, and he represented his civilization at its best. The Pope was touched to call for crusades again. Manuel reached Paris in June, where King Charles VI welcomed him and promised more forces under Boucicaut. Then the Vasilevs went to England to meet King Henry IV. The two monarchs celebrated Christmas together, but Henry offered no concrete help. Nor did the other Latins, despite their fondness for Manuel, who returned to Paris in 1401 and tried negotiating with the kings in Iberia, and realized that no help was coming. But the Vasilevs was exhausted and decided to chill in Paris, while Constantinople was even more threatened. There, Ioannes VII sent envoys to Timur, who had already been insulted by Bayezid, and asked Trebizond and Genoa for ships. He was gonna give Bayezid an ass-whooping that even the Thunderbolt wouldn't expect. In 1402, right before the Romans and their French allies were about to break, Timur defeated Bayezid at the Battle of Ankara. Bayezid was captured, chained in an iron cage, and he died of shame next year. His Ottoman Empire disintegrated. Timur brutally plundered Anatolia, massacring Muslims and Christians, and he encouraged the other Turkish emirates to stay independent and for Bayezid's sons to fight. After leaving Asia Minor in chaos, Timur left. The Turco-Mongol warlord did for Constantinople what the Latins could not, and the Romans thanked God and his mother for yet another miraculous delivery. The news spread to the west, and Manuel was overjoyed. Slowly, he began returning to his empire. Free of that existential threat, Manuel II Palaiologos could finally use his talents to give the Roman state a brief revival before its eventual death, which we will cover next time, along with the fall of Constantinople. This will be almost the series finale, and I can't wait to conclude the East Roman story for you guys. And now I will customarily thank my wonderful patrons over on Patreon who keeps this channel going. Dragon Lord, Umphea Game Projects, A Happy Magpie, Alex P. Keaton, Cody Danroth, Tiropita Productions, and Francis Morin. Thank you all, and see you all very soon for the next video.